The morning was golden, the streets of London alive with history in the making. Thousands pressed against the barriers, eyes wide, hearts racing. For some, it was a dream, decades in the waiting. For others, a story to pass on to children yet unborn. And then it happened. The gilded carriage rounded the corner, and through its windows the faces of William and Catherine appeared. A hush swept over the crowd. Not silence, but something deeper. Tears fell freely, strangers held hands, and history seemed to breathe before their very eyes. This wasn't just a royal entrance. It was a moment that bound millions together in awe, pride, and emotion too powerful to put into words. If moments like this move you too, if you felt the weight of history and the beauty of human connection, then join us here. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with friends who cherish these once-in-a-lifetime occasions. Together, we'll relive the moments that remind us why history isn't just written in books. It's lived in the beating hearts of people like you. The sun rose gently over London, painting the ancient skyline in soft shades of gold. It wasn't just another morning. From the earliest hours, the streets had begun to swell with people, not tourists on an ordinary day, but citizens and travelers united by the pull of history. Some carried flags, others clutched cameras, but most simply brought their hearts, eager to witness a moment they knew would live forever in memory. Sarah Mitchell, a retired teacher from Yorkshire, had made the journey with her young granddaughter, Emma. The girl's eyes darted from the waving flags to the sea of faces. "Gran, do you think we'll really see them?" she asked, her voice full of innocent wonder. Sarah smiled, remembering her own grandmother's tales of royal processions. "We'll see them, love," she whispered. "And when we do, you'll understand why moments like this matter." Everywhere you looked, stories unfolded. Families who had never met shared sandwiches. Strangers offered tea from well-worn thermoses. The air buzzed with chatter in countless accents, proof that this wasn't just a British moment. It was a global gathering. Veterans in neatly pressed jackets stood shoulder to shoulder with children holding hand-drawn crowns. Students, nurses, shopkeepers, grandparents, all pressed together behind the barriers, waiting. And there was something unspoken in the air, anticipation mixed with reverence. People weren't just waiting to glimpse a carriage, they were waiting to feel connected to something greater than themselves. Police and volunteers patrolled the routes, but even they couldn't hide their smiles. Officer James Rodriguez, who had worked dozens of public events, confessed quietly to a colleague, "There's joy here today. Real joy. I've never felt anything quite like it." The city was holding its breath, but not in silence, in song, laughter, and stories that echoed down centuries of tradition. By mid-morning, the atmosphere had ripened into something almost electric. Vendors sold commemorative scarves and programs, their cheerful calls weaving into the sound of brass bands rehearsing somewhere down the route. The rhythmic beat of drums gave the air a steady pulse, like the collective heartbeat of a nation bracing itself for history. Children sat on shoulders, pointing to every movement, convinced that each passing car must be the one. "There! Is that them?" Gasps and ripples of excitement darted through the crowd again and again. False alarms, yes, but no one seemed to mind. The anticipation was part of the magic. 82-year-old Margaret Thompson, seated in her wheelchair near the front, had been brought by her son after a long night's drive. She had seen monarchs rise and fall, watched Diana's wedding decades earlier, and yet today felt different. "It feels like hope," she murmured, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the small Union Jack on her lap. Around her, younger families leaned closer, listening, sensing the depth of her words. And it wasn't only citizens. The world's media had descended too. Cameras carefully capturing not just the grandeur of Westminster, but the very human faces of this gathering. Local resident Patricia Barnes had thrown open her balcony windows, offering sandwiches to neighbors and strangers alike. "This is what we do," she laughed. "We share it together." London itself seemed to lean into the spirit, its ancient stones echoing with the sounds of people becoming more than a crowd, becoming a community. As the hours stretched, the energy only deepened. You could feel it in the stillness that would suddenly fall, broken by distant motorcade sounds followed by a wave of cheers. "They're coming," someone would cry, and for a moment thousands believed it. Hearts raced, eyes lifted, only for the excitement to fade again into chatter and laughter. Yet with each false alarm, the anticipation grew sharper, as if the very air was preparing for the moment of truth. Even children sensed it. 10-year-old Samuel Chen, holding his mother's hand, waved his small flag with fierce pride. His family had moved from Hong Kong years ago, and he whispered to her, "Today feels like home." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes, knowing this wasn't just about royals. It was about belonging. By late morning, the crowd had settled into a rhythm of waiting, not impatiently, but with the calm intensity of people who know that history is approaching. Conversations softened, phones were checked for updates, and people adjusted their footing for the best possible view. The barriers, once merely metal, now felt like a threshold between ordinary life and something extraordinary. Then, faint at first, came the sound that made hearts stop, the rumble of engines in the distance. Not just any sound, but the unmistakable growl of ceremonial motorcycles. Heads turned, conversations faltered. A hush fell, not complete silence, but a tightening of breath across thousands. Every child was lifted higher, every camera was raised, and for a single fleeting heartbeat, London seemed to stand still. History was about to arrive. The first sound wasn't the sight of the carriage itself, but the rhythm of hooves striking the pavement. At once, the crowd leaned forward. The household cavalry appeared, their polished armor catching the morning sun like fire, their horses marching with a pride that seemed centuries old. Gasps rose from the crowd. For many, it was the most magnificent sight they had ever seen. And then, a golden gleam emerged in the distance. The carriage. The state coach, heavy with history, ornate in detail, drawn by horses that seemed to glide rather than walk. The sight was so majestic that time itself appeared to slow. Phones lifted in unison, yet many lowered them quickly, realizing that some moments demand to be seen with the naked eye. Inside the carriage, through the glass, faces came into focus. First Catherine, radiant, her gown glimmering in the light, her smile carrying warmth that seemed to reach every corner of the crowd. There was a hush, and then, as if on cue, tears began to fall. Elderly Rose Peaton, who had lived through the Blitz, whispered to her daughter, "She looks like a queen. She truly looks like our queen." Beside her sat William, his bearing steady, the weight of destiny evident in his expression. But there was humanity too, an almost vulnerable awareness that this was no ordinary ceremony. This was the culmination of years of preparation, of loss, of perseverance, and of love. They waved not with mechanical precision, but with something personal. Every gesture felt as though it was meant for the one individual standing just behind the barrier. Strangers swore later that Catherine had looked straight at them. In truth, she had looked at everyone. And then came the moment that stopped time. As the carriage passed a group of elderly veterans, Catherine placed her hand over her heart and mouthed the words, "Thank you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. 96-year-old Albert Thompson, a World War II veteran, had stood ramrod straight all morning. But now, his weathered hands shook as he raised a trembling salute. Tears streaked his cheeks as he whispered to his granddaughter, "She sees us. She really sees us." The crowd rippled with emotion. Some sobbed openly, others simply held hands. It was no longer about monarchy alone. It was about recognition, of service, of history, of humanity itself. For one extraordinary heartbeat, it felt as if Catherine had embraced them all. The carriage rolled onward, but the impact lingered. Photographers captured the moment, yet no lens could fully hold the raw emotion that pulsed through the crowd. Couples held each other closer. Parents told children to remember what they had just seen. The tears falling were not of sadness, but of joy too profound for words. As Westminster Abbey loomed closer, its ancient stone towers rising like sentinels, the mood shifted again, from jubilant celebration to reverent awe. The bells began to toll, their sound echoing through London like the heartbeat of history itself. When the carriage finally halted, the world seemed to pause. William stepped down first, turning immediately to extend his hand to Catherine. It was a simple gesture, but within it was everything: chivalry, love, partnership. She accepted with a smile that seemed to blend gratitude with resolve. Together, they ascended the stone steps, each stride heavy with meaning. Children whispered, "It's like a fairy tale." Yet adults knew better. This was no fairy tale. This was flesh and blood, courage and responsibility, humanity wrapped in ceremony. The people saw not just a king and queen in waiting, but a couple bound together, to each other, and to them. At the top of the steps, William and Catherine turned one last time. Their wave was not grandiose. It was simple, personal, and deeply moving. A thank you, a farewell, and a promise all at once. Then, with the great doors of Westminster Abbey yawning open behind them, they crossed the threshold. In that moment, the crowd erupted. Cheers, tears, applause, voices cracking with emotion. It was the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. As the Abbey doors closed behind them, the sound of cheering still echoed through the ancient streets. Strangers, who only hours earlier had stood apart, were now speaking as if they had known each other for years, united by a memory they would never forget. For some, it was the grandeur of the spectacle. For others, it was the quiet humanity in a wave, a smile, or a gesture of gratitude. Sarah Mitchell, who had brought her granddaughter Emma, summed it up best as she wiped away tears she hadn't expected to shed. It didn't feel like we were just watching them. It felt like we were part of it. Like this story belongs to all of us. And perhaps that is the lasting gift of William and Catherine's coronation arrival. It wasn't simply a royal procession. It was a reminder that history is made not only in palaces, but in the hearts of people who believe in hope, continuity, and the power of shared humanity. Because sometimes the most royal moments are the most human ones.